The Finance Minister says he's got a balanced plan to reduce debt and keep services going despite concerning unemployment forecasts. The books have been opened ahead of the election today and they show a bleak outlook with unemployment set to rise to 7.8% in the first quarter of next year, while GDP continues to shrink. Grant Robertson says he's not gilding the lily and there will be tough times ahead for New Zealanders. He told Alex Perrottet, with all the uncertainty, it's unrealistic to make any promises of where the country's debt rate should be.
At the moment, I think in the conditions we're in now, making those kinds of promises isn't actually responsible. What I know is that I have, over my time as Finance Minister, shown that I have been disciplined. We've reduced debt to under 20%. I remain committed to keeping debt under control, but given where we are in this pandemic, what we can best do is set the pathway that we have and work together to keep debt under control and maintain those public services. More will emerge over time as we get clearer on how the pandemic affects the economy globally, but we will have higher levels of debt and a deficit for some time to come, and I have been saying that since March of this year.
Okay, as of tomorrow, we are officially in recession. I mean, I think we can agree on that those figures are going to come out as showing 2 consecutive quarters. So what more are you going to do in this next term? You've promised not to hike any other income taxes apart from 2% of New Zealanders, earning you $500 million. What else are you going to do?
Well, we've already got a program we've outlined of a massive investment in infrastructure to build more houses, to be able to create jobs right across the economy. We're going to be supporting people into work through the extension of the flexi wage program. We're supporting small businesses to be able to thrive and move online. We've got a host of programs that are about that. But then we're also looking to the future with industry transformation plans. We're in there now with the agricultural sector, working on an agri-tech strategy that will lift the value of the wages in that sector. We've got a similar one in construction and in the digital area. We have to lift our productivity. We need to be more sustainable. That's why we're heading towards a 100% renewable electricity strategy and backing that up with investments in new technology like the hydrogen economy, which actually will lead to export earnings and will lead to better jobs with higher wages. All that's part of our 5-point economic plan. The tax part of the equation is only ever part of the equation. And yes, we are asking higher income New Zealanders to pitch in a little bit more. When we put all of that together, that is a steady path for New Zealand to sustainably grow the economy and manage debt. But when we're facing a 1 in 100-year economic shock, there's no single silver bullet. Anyone who's trying to sell you that isn't being realistic. I think today we've seen a pathway forward from here that is realistic.
So what are you going to cut then? It's 1 in 100 years. You've got a license here to think outside the Labor square, the paradigm. What are you going to cut? You've shown you've already been willing to cut future years of the fees-free program, right? So what else would you be open to cutting?
Well, look, there's a number of areas where we're going to have to be very careful with our spending, and fees-free is an example that you've given. We also have already, focused, for example, around funding low-income people to reduce the cost for them to go to the doctor, but not having the policy that we went to 2017 with an overall reduction. So we've been showing our willingness to do that, but actually it's about investment more than it is about cutting things. We need to strongly invest in the productive side of our economy and support those quality public services, because that's actually what enables us to come through this shock with New Zealanders both healthy but also prosperous. And so, yes, there'll be areas where we will look to make sure our spending is of the highest possible quality, but actually investing in our people and retraining and in skills and investing in our businesses and industry will get us through this better than anything else.
You've got $14.1 billion in that COVID fund. It's sitting there. We don't know, do we? I mean, just how much of that's going to be needed to fight COVID. In your own mind, how much of that might be committed to funding these election promises you're talking about?
Well, for the vast bulk of that is there to be used if it is needed to help with COVID recovery, to deal with when we do have a resurgence like we've recently seen.
But you're going to eat into it, aren't you?
We need to be careful about that. It will not be spent unless it is needed. And so, we continue to be disciplined about that. But obviously, we don't know. The world does not know where the COVID journey ends. And so that money remains available to us, but we will very carefully and judiciously use it in COVID recovery.
Have you allocated some of it already to election promises?
A small amount, yes, where it directly relates to COVID recovery. So we announced the training incentive allowance policy at the weekend, which is about supporting people, obviously, during a difficult period and who are out of work to be able to get qualifications, and the extension of the small business cash flow scheme, which again is a direct COVID response. So there are some areas where we are committing it to elements of what our election policy is about, but the vast bulk of it remains on the table to deal with the future of COVID, which nobody can be certain about.
You might have heard we had Nick Mowbray on, it's sort of the, I guess you call him a toy mogul, calling for large corporates who got the wage subsidy and are still turning a profit, and they're paying dividends, to pay that wage subsidy back. Should they do so?
Well, they don't have to, because we set the scheme up in such a way that it was designed to give confidence and cash flow. It was designed to make sure that people weren't laid off. Obviously, the criteria were that people had to stay employed, and so it was about keeping that attachment between an employee and an employer. Some businesses have decided to pay back because things didn't turn out the way that they forecast they might. But for me, it was far more important to get that money out, to give that confidence, to ensure that people weren't laid off unnecessarily. I can't guarantee what a company would have done, regardless of whether or not they're a wealthy company or they're now turning a profit. If people look into their own conscience and decide that's what they want to do, that's a good thing. But they are still obeying the rules of the scheme if they don't do that.
Was that clever? I mean, this is all adding to our debt, which is growing, and this is part of the problem. I mean, the wage subsidy is a ventilator, right? I mean, why give it to companies that can effectively breathe on their own?
Well, it's a no-regrets approach, and I can't guarantee what those companies would have done. They may well have laid people off regardless of whether they ended up turning a profit. We wanted to protect New Zealanders' jobs, and 1.7 million New Zealanders' jobs have been protected through the wage subsidy scheme. We wanted to deploy it quickly, and I think people appreciated that. And so, with 2020 hindsight, there's all sorts of things that we can say, but I remain very comfortable and proud, in fact, of that scheme, because it did its job to keep New Zealanders in work.
And that was the Finance Minister speaking to Alex Perrottet.